Critical minerals is one of those industries that's long been touted as having tremendous potential in Australia, but do you feel that potential is being realised? And perhaps the most recent example of that has been the Future Made in Australia plan to put critical minerals front and centre. Has this initiative borne any meaningful fruit so far?
It's bearing some fruit, Paul, but there's much more upside to come if post-election policy settings allow for it, and critically, if markets for critical minerals in the US, Japan, South Korea, and of course China, Australia's biggest minerals customer, allow for it.
Yeah, and to what degree does China cast a long shadow over this industry? Because it does control something like 90% of the world's critical minerals supply. Is it cost effective for Australian producers to compete with China?
Well, Australian producers are some of the largest suppliers of critical minerals, mined product, to China. Often those minerals go to China for processing. China controls much of the world's minerals processing, from copper through to rare earth elements and lithium as well. Of course, that's very important for battery minerals. And so Australia is very dependent upon China, and Australia is one of China's major minerals suppliers, critical minerals plus other minerals like iron ore. So China is and will remain very important. The trick is for like-minded countries to diversify and secure critical minerals supply chains, particularly in the face of Chinese market manipulation and withholding of supply, as we've seen in the last couple of weeks in relation to many or several rare earth elements. So China is important to Australia as a market. The US is a small minerals market at this time, but an important future minerals market. And of course, Japan and South Korea, and in the future, Europe will be important markets as well.
Professor, how well has Australia done in diversifying those energy clients so far? And what else needs to be done by the government in order to ensure that China is not just the biggest client?
It is important to diversify, as I said, for Australia, but it's also important for minerals customers, mostly manufacturing nations, to diversify their supply chains as well. How well that's going, it's not going so well so far. Australia has signed some 27 agreements with customer countries or potential customer countries around critical minerals supply chains, but it's early days still. And Paul mentioned earlier the Future Made in Australia policy of the current government, and we'll see what the election results bring. But the Future Made in Australia policy is very much about manufacturing using Australian critical minerals. But nations, customer nations like the United States, for example, and Japan and South Korea, are very focused on processing domestically as a key part of securing their supply chain. So there's a tension between Australia's desire to process its critical minerals and export more value-added critical minerals, and the desire of customer nations to do processing onshore for security issues, for security reasons, but also to add value domestically. And there's a bit of a subsidy arms race on at the moment, and I'm not sure that Australia can match, for example, the deep US subsidies that are available.
In terms of the refining of critical minerals, there is a desire, as you mentioned, to onshore that, or at the very least friendshore it, but it's not exactly an environmentally friendly process, and I'm assuming it's a time-consuming one as well. So can you give us a sense to some of the barriers as to doing that?
Well, the environmental impacts of minerals processing can be managed. Rare earth elements often have some radioactivity associated with them, so that takes some particular management, but the impacts can be managed. it's really about the cost of construction of new minerals processing plants, the technologies required, and China dominates processing technologies for a number of minerals, particularly lithium and rare earth elements, and then the operating costs. And Australia is a high wage country and has quite high operating costs relative to some of its customer countries. So it's imperative for Australia to do what it can to, one, reduce the cost of construction, two, reduce the cost of operation, and three, permitting by governments is also an issue, and the time taken. So shortening that permitting time will help Australia to be more competitive.
All right, Ian Satchwell, Adjunct Professor at the University of Queensland Sustainable Minerals Institute. Thanks so much for joining us today. And we have more on Australia ahead every Tuesday, 10:40 a.m. if you're watching in Sydney. That's 8:40 a.m. in Hong Kong. Plus, you can tune into the Bloomberg Australia podcast, which delves into the biggest stories shaping the country's role in global business. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, or Bloomberg.com.